The execution was supposed to break humanity. Across the galaxy, trillions of viewers tuned in as the Galactic Empire broadcast its message of dominance. The feed displayed a sterile execution chamber, bright white lights illuminating the frail human girl shackled to a steel platform. No name was given, no context provided, only a faceless victim caught in the Empire's grip. She was young, vulnerable, her yellow dress marred with dirt and blood, a stark contrast to the cold precision of her captors. The Emperor's voice, deep and resonant, declared humanity's defiance futile. Then, in a single, brutal moment, she was gone. There was no sound from Earth, no official response, no pleas for mercy. But in an undisclosed location far beyond the Empire's surveillance, a team of men watched in silence. Their faces betrayed nothing. No shock, no grief, no hesitation. Just the cold, calculating stillness of predators assessing a kill. The moment the screen flickered to black, the leader of the team, Major Cole Harrison, spoke 3 words. "It's begun now." The men around him, all veterans of wars the Empire had never bothered to document, understood without further instruction. The death of that girl had set something in motion that no alien ruler could stop. This wasn't about justice. It wasn't about morality. It was something older, deeper, an instinct woven into the marrow of humanity itself. The Empire had made a mistake, one it wouldn't live to regret. Nathan Briggs, a cyber warfare specialist, was already at his console, fingers dancing over the keyboard. The Empire prided itself on its technological superiority, but they had never fought humans in the shadows. Briggs infiltrated their communication grids in seconds, planting silent subroutines that would lie dormant until the perfect moment. He didn't need fanfare. He didn't need to shout victory. He just needed to open the right doors when the time came. Beside him, Lieutenant David Kane studied a holographic layout of the Empire's central defense network. Every planetary shield, every fleet deployment, every security override the Empire thought was foolproof. It was all laid out in front of him, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He leaned forward, marking vulnerabilities with a practiced eye. "They won't even see it coming," he murmured. Captain Ryan Tex Calloway, a demolitions expert with a penchant for efficiency, checked the status of their ordnance. The Empire relied on overwhelming force, but brute strength was nothing against precision. His explosives were already en route, embedded within supply shipments heading to key shipyards and command centers. Every timer was set, every fail-safe in place. Then there was Sergeant James Rourke, a man whose history was whispered about in the darker circles of military intelligence. He had no console, no maps, no explosives. Just a knife he kept sharpening as he listened to the others work. His role wouldn't come until later, when the Empire's leaders found themselves hunted in the ruins of their own making. Cole checked his watch. 12 minutes since the broadcast. 12 minutes since the Empire had unknowingly signed its own death warrant. He turned to Briggs. "How long?" Briggs didn't look up. 3 minutes to infiltration. 7 until full control. Cole nodded. Time moved differently now. Every second was another domino tipping forward, another link in the chain dragging the Empire to oblivion. The Galactic Empire had conquered hundreds of species, crushed rebellions with impunity, and ruled with an iron grip for centuries. But it had never faced an enemy like humanity. The Empire operated on power, on the belief that fear alone could maintain control. That assumption had worked against lesser civilizations. It did not work against humans, because humans didn't break. Humans adapted, and when the time was right, humans retaliated. A quiet beep signaled Briggs' success. "We're in," he said. Kane exhaled slowly, adjusting the targeting parameters for the fleet disruptions. "Let's make history." Cole's gaze remained fixed on the darkened screen, where the Empire's message had played. The girl's faceless execution had been their declaration of power. They would never have the chance to send another. The first cracks in the Empire's armor went unnoticed. A minor delay in fleet communications, a sensor glitch in one of the deep space monitoring stations, an unexpected power fluctuation in a key orbital defense platform. To the bureaucrats overseeing the Empire's vast infrastructure, these were nothing more than routine errors, minor inconveniences easily dismissed with a wave of a hand. But to Major Cole Harrison and his team, they were signals, proof that their plan was unfolding exactly as intended. The Empire's arrogance was its greatest weakness. It had grown so accustomed to crushing its enemies with sheer overwhelming force that it had never learned how to fight a war in the shadows. It would learn now. Nathan Briggs worked in silence, his fingers gliding over his console as he activated the first sequence of disruptions. The Empire's Central Command network was a monolith, its security systems seemingly impenetrable. But nothing was truly invulnerable, not when humans were involved. The codes had been cracked, the access points secured. With each keystroke, Briggs wove his digital virus deeper into the Empire's arteries. It wouldn't bring the behemoth down immediately. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to make them blind, to make them doubt their own systems. David Kane monitored fleet movements with the patience of a predator. The Empire had positioned its warships in rigid formations, a strategy designed to showcase strength rather than adaptability. That would cost them. As Kane issued false directives through their compromised command network, entire squadrons unknowingly drifted off course, pulled away from critical defensive positions. Cole watched it all unfold from the central command station, his expression unreadable. The countdown had begun, and the Empire didn't even realize it was running out of time. Captain Ryan Calloway had his part to play as well. The explosives he had embedded within the Empire supply chains were already in transit, scattered across key facilities. They wouldn't detonate yet, not until the perfect moment. The Empire would learn the cost of underestimating human ingenuity soon enough. But it wasn't just technology and sabotage that would bring the Empire down. Sergeant James Rourke had no keyboard, no explosives, no need for elaborate tactics. His battlefield was different. The Empire's officers believed themselves untouchable, secure within their fortresses of steel and arrogance. That illusion would shatter tonight. The first target was Admiral Virex, a high-ranking officer stationed aboard the Empire's primary fleet command vessel. The man had personally overseen the execution broadcast, his voice ringing with cold indifference as he justified the killing of an unarmed girl. He would not live to see another sunrise. Rourke had slipped aboard the vessel unnoticed, moving through the ship like a wraith. The Empire's security was built to detect armies, not ghosts. When the Admiral finally realized he wasn't alone, it was too late. The Empire had no funeral rites for men like Virex. His disappearance would be chalked up to a mere security lapse, an isolated incident. It wasn't. Cole received the confirmation with a slight nod, his attention shifting to the next phase. The Empire had been struck, but it was still too arrogant to recognize the wound. That would change soon. Briggs activated the second wave of digital attacks. Power grids across the capital planet flickered, then surged violently. Defense stations locked onto phantom threats, their automated turrets turning against their own ships. Fleet Command issued orders that never reached their intended recipients. The system was still intact, but now it was hemorrhaging. Kane adjusted the false fleet orders, drawing key warships into dead zones where human strike teams lay in wait. The Empire relied on numerical superiority, but humans had never needed numbers to win a fight. They needed only an opening. And now they had one. Calloway's explosives reached their final destinations: weapons depots, fuel reserves, orbital shipyards. The Empire had spent centuries fortifying its infrastructure, building an unshakable foundation of power. But all it had taken was a handful of men with a plan to turn that foundation into a house of cards. Rourke moved on to his next target. One by one, key officials disappeared. Some vanished from secure locations, without a trace. Others were found in their chambers, their bodies slumped over data consoles, eyes still frozen in shock. Fear spread through the ranks like a plague. The invincible empire had never known the taste of true vulnerability until now. Cole checked his watch. 22 minutes since the execution broadcast. 5 minutes until the final phase. The empire had been given every opportunity to recognize the storm bearing down upon it. It had failed. Briggs initiated the last sequence of system disruptions. Entire planetary defense grids shut down in unison. Surveillance systems went dark. The Emperor's personal security network, a fortress of firewalls and redundancies, collapsed in on itself. Kane sent the final fleet orders, guiding the Empire's warships into strategic kill zones. The commanders, confused and desperate for direction, followed orders without question. By the time they realized the trap, it was already too late. Calloway's explosives detonated. A dozen critical locations erupted in fire and steel, the destruction rippling outward like a chain reaction. The Empire's supply lines crumbled. Its war machine ground to a halt. Rourke completed his mission. The Emperor's most trusted advisors, the architects of the Empire's reign of terror, were dead before they could even issue a command. Cole exhaled slowly. The Empire had stood unchallenged for centuries. It had ruled through fear, through absolute power. But it had made one fatal miscalculation. It had mistaken silence for submission. Cole Harrison watched the chaos unfold from his command station, his expression devoid of triumph. This was not victory yet. It was an opportunity, nothing more. The Empire's vast machinery still functioned, albeit in a state of disarray. Their warships, though misdirected and fragmented, remained formidable. Their ground forces, though cut off from their leadership, still had numbers beyond measure. The beast was wounded, but not yet slain. That would take precision. That would take finality. Nathan Briggs remained at his terminal, fingers moving with an almost mechanical precision. The Empire's network was crumbling beneath his digital assault, but remnants of resistance remained. He could see their technicians scrambling to regain control, rewriting code, rerouting power, searching for a foothold in the unraveling mess. Briggs denied them every step of the way. He corrupted their backups, fed false diagnostics to their engineers, turned their own security measures into weapons against them. The more they struggled, the tighter the noose became. David Kane kept his focus on fleet movements. The Empire's admirals were finally realizing something was wrong. He intercepted their distress calls, heard the panic in their voices as they demanded status reports from ships that were no longer where they should be. Some commanders attempted to consolidate their forces, abandoning key positions in their desperation to regroup. Kane let them. He wanted them to move exactly as they were moving. Every misplaced warship, every confused squadron, brought them closer to the point of no return. Ryan Calloway's explosives had done their job, but explosives alone would not bring an empire to its knees. Now came the next phase, disruption at the human level. He had sent small, highly trained teams into critical locations. Not to fight. Not yet. Their purpose was simpler, to spread doubt, to break the Empire's ability to coordinate. Military outposts received orders from supposed high command, instructing them to stand down. Governors received conflicting directives, some telling them to evacuate, others demanding they hold position at all costs. Civilian officials were fed reports of catastrophic losses, rumors of total system collapse. The more tangled the confusion became, the closer the Empire drifted to total paralysis. James Rourke moved through the streets of the capital unseen, his presence a ghost in the chaos. The assassinations had sent shockwaves through the political structure, but there was still one piece left on the board, the Emperor himself. Rourke knew the man would not go down easily. The Empire had spent decades cultivating the illusion of his invincibility, surrounding him with layers of protection, making his very existence a symbol of unshakable authority. That illusion would shatter tonight. Cole monitored the breakdown of enemy communications, his mind racing ahead to the final strike. The next 30 minutes would determine whether their efforts culminated in triumph or in a slow, grinding retaliation from the Empire. They could not afford drawn-out resistance. The fall had to be absolute. Briggs launched the next set of countermeasures, burying the Empire's command systems in fabricated crises. Warning sirens blared across warships that were in no immediate danger. Entire fleets were redirected toward imaginary threats, some even ordered to fire upon what they were told were hostile forces. The Empire had built itself on control. Now, it was slipping through their fingers, and they couldn't stop it. Kane watched as two of the Empire's most elite squadrons opened fire on each other in orbit, both believing the other had been compromised. He took no pleasure in it. This was not about revenge. It was about ending a threat so thoroughly that it could never rise again. Calloway's teams moved into position across key infrastructure points. They did not engage yet, merely waiting for the signal. The moment the final blow was struck, they would ensure there was nothing left for the Empire to salvage. No supply chains, no reinforced positions, no fallback plans. Only the void. Rourke reached his target. The Emperor's palace, once a fortress of unbreakable security, was a hollow shell. His personal guard, confused by the failures in their command structure, had abandoned their posts in search of guidance that no longer existed. The defenses had been designed to repel direct assaults, never infiltration. The Empire had always assumed it would be fighting armies. It had never considered that one man could be its undoing. Cole's voice came through the comms, steady and unshaken. He had never once doubted the plan, never once considered failure. This was why they had come. This was why they had risked everything. The Empire had executed an innocent girl on live broadcast, believing it would be a warning, a message to humanity to know its place. Instead, it had written its own epitaph. Briggs completed the last sequence of the digital offensive. Every remaining trace of centralized control was severed. Defense platforms turned unresponsive. Automated systems shut down. Entire planetary grids blinked into darkness. The Empire's heart had stopped beating. Kane gave the final fleet directive, sending the last remaining warships into a spiraling collapse of miscommunication and friendly fire. The fleet would not recover. By the time they realized the truth, there would be nothing left to fight for. Calloway's teams moved. The final detonations erupted across the capital, consuming the last remnants of the Empire's war machine. Supply lines turned to ash. Reinforcements that might have arrived found only ruin. Rourke stepped into the Emperor's chamber, facing the man who had ruled through terror and absolute power. The Emperor, for the first time, had nothing to say. He had spent his life believing himself untouchable, his empire eternal. Now, as the walls crumbled around him, he understood the truth too late. Cole stood in silence as the transmission came through, the simple confirmation that their task was done. The Empire was no more. It had taken them precisely 27 minutes. The galaxy was silent in the aftermath. No broadcasts from the Empire's capital. No directives from high command. No orders trickling down the rigid chain of control that had once governed entire star systems. The vast machinery that had sustained the Empire's reign was still, its gears broken, its core hollowed out. And in that silence, humanity's message echoed louder than any declaration of war ever could. Cole Harrison stood in the dimly lit operations center, his eyes fixed on the fractured remnants of the Empire's vast communications network. His team had spent years preparing for this moment, planning every strike, anticipating every countermeasure, dismantling every system with ruthless precision. Now, as the dust settled, he felt none of the triumph that victory was supposed to bring. There was no celebration, no grand speeches, no revelry, just the simple, unshakable certainty that the mission was complete. Nathan Briggs sat at his terminal, watching the final remnants of the Empire's security systems collapse. The last encrypted data caches were unraveling, spilling their secrets across the void. Evidence of war crimes, classified orders, the names of every collaborator who had ever stood in silent approval of the atrocities committed under the Empire's banner. He sent the files spiraling outward into the galaxy, ensuring that no one would ever be able to rewrite history. No one would ever claim ignorance. The Empire had condemned a child to death in full view of the universe, believing their power was absolute. Now, the truth of their rule would be exposed just as publicly, and there would be no redemption. David Kane observed the scattered fleets, or what remained of them. Without leadership, without purpose, they drifted in uncertainty. Some ships had turned on each other in blind panic. Others had fled to the edges of known space, unwilling to face what came next. The Empire's admirals, once symbols of unrelenting authority, were sending desperate distress signals, calling for aid that would never arrive. Kane allowed the transmissions to linger for a moment before cutting them off. Mercy had never been part of the plan. Ryan Calloway's teams moved methodically through the ruins of the Empire's strongholds, ensuring there was no possibility of resurgence. They had not come to negotiate, nor to rebuild what had been destroyed. Their task was finality. The weapons, the infrastructure, the logistical networks, everything that had sustained the Empire's iron grip was systematically dismantled. The galaxy would never again be ruled by fear. Not under these banners, not under these names. James Rourke moved unseen through the Empire's devastated capital. His presence felt only in the growing absence of its last remaining enforcers. The Emperor had been the final piece, the last vestige of a dying regime clinging to the illusion of authority. Now there were only echoes. His death had not been broadcast, had not been turned into a spectacle, because there had been no need. The Empire had relied on his image as an unshakable figure, a symbol of their supposed invincibility. By the time the truth spread, it would be clear to all that he had been nothing more than a man, and a defeated one at that. Cole listened as reports came in from across the Empire's former territories. Some planets had already begun to rise in open revolt, casting down the remnants of imperial rule. Others remained in stunned silence, waiting to see what would come next. There was no single reaction, no unified response. Only the raw unpredictability of a people who had lived too long under oppression, now staring into an uncertain future. That uncertainty was not his concern. The Empire's fall had never been about governance, about replacing one structure with another. It had been about justice, about delivering a message that could not be ignored. Briggs continued sifting through the data, uncovering the names of those who had profited from the Empire's cruelty, those who had built their fortunes on the suffering of others, the military officers who had overseen planetary occupations, the politicians who had rubber-stamped purges, the corporate heads who had turned war into profit. Their names would not be forgotten, nor would they be allowed to fade into obscurity, hoping to escape the consequences of their complicity. He compiled the information into one final transmission, sending it outward to every free system in the galaxy. Let them run. Let them hide. There would be no sanctuary. Kane watched as the last remnants of the Empire's navy surrendered, not out of loyalty, not out of defiance, but out of sheer exhaustion. The fight had been drained from them, their purpose shattered along with the regime they had served. He did not waste time with demands for unconditional surrender, did not offer terms of peace. Those who sought survival would find it on their own, and those who still believed in the Empire's cause would face their own reckoning soon enough. Calloway's teams completed their final sweep, confirming that no critical infrastructure remained intact. The Empire had built itself on control, on absolute dominance over every aspect of life within its reach. That control was gone now, not merely broken, but erased. Whatever came next would have to be built from the ground up, without the chains of the past to dictate its shape. Rourke remained in the capital just long enough to see the first signs of collapse spread through the city. The imperial banners were already being torn down, the statues defaced, the symbols of authority defiled by those who had once feared them. He did not linger. His work was done. The people would decide what came next, whether through chaos or through unity. Either way, the Empire's shadow had been lifted. Cole gave the final order, a single word spoken with quiet certainty. Their task was complete. They had not come for conquest, had not come to install themselves as rulers or saviors. The war was over, not because the enemy had surrendered, but because there was nothing left for them to surrender. The Empire had died the moment it had chosen to make an example of a single human child, believing that no one would challenge them. They had never understood what it meant to provoke humanity, what it meant to turn their cruelty into the catalyst for their own destruction. The mission had lasted precisely 27 minutes. Briggs shut down his terminal, the last remaining connections to the Empire severed. Kane turned away from the fleet's remains, knowing that whatever came next, it would not be dictated by warships in orbit. Calloway's teams withdrew, their work complete, their path leading them away from the ruins they had left behind. Rourke disappeared into the void, his presence no longer necessary. Cole stood in silence for a moment longer, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then, without ceremony, he turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. The Empire was gone, and the galaxy would never forget why.